Today, I'm having a conversation with Aleks Gampel, the co-founder and COO of Cuby Technologies. I previously had a conversation with the company's CEO, Oleg, and I'm excited to dive deeper into the operational side of things with Aleks. Now, just a quick refresher, Cuby is making microfactories for new home construction. These microfactories are small, compact, and automated facilities that are placed near new home construction sites. And now what's unique about what the company has done is they've redesigned the entire home building process from the ground up, not just the construction, but also the supply chain and the logistics. And each one of these microfactories are placed near new home construction sites, and they produce about 200 homes per year. Now, the company is looking to address two major problems we have in the US today. One is the lack of skilled labor, and two, the lack of high quality, affordable housing. Now, Aleks has spent his entire career in real estate, and he had been looking for different industrialized construction concepts that could really help reduce the cost of skilled labor. And he couldn't really find anything that was compelling until he met his co-founder, Oleg. In this conversation, we get into the nuts and bolts of decentralized manufacturing, why it's so difficult, and the future of home construction. And in full disclosure, I am an investor in Cuby. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and remember to go direct. Hey, Aleks, how are you, man?
Hey Jordan, thanks for having me. Excited for this little series.
Yeah, thanks for hopping on. I had a great conversation actually with Oleg last week. So we got the whole QB crew.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'm sure Oleg's a lot more fun to talk to than me.
Great. So just a little bit of context. So why don't you tell everyone a little about who you are and what you do, and then we'll get into it.
Aleks Gampel here. I'm one of the two co-founders of Cuby Technologies. We're a vertically integrated hardware software business that works within the improving processes around home building. I come from a real estate background. I've kind of fused between real estate and technology and had a pretty unorthogonal, non-linear path.
In what way?
I feel like I've wore many hats over a very short period of time. Definitely bring kind of the skill set of, hey, can do anything resourcefully, maybe generalist rather than specialist, but most of my concentration has been in real estate development and private equity.
Got it. How and what brought you to, I don't know, like what brought you to real estate, private equity, that whole world? I mean, like what drew you there initially?
I was born in Russia, interesting place to grow up, and then I moved very young to the US, but I come from a real estate family. My father was a real estate developer and in a desert called Siberia. A very weird place to build a business, to build a real estate business specifically, but it catered to a lot of the uh, natural resource companies. So he built housing and commercial real estate that serviced these little towns that essentially whose economies essentially thrived on oil, gas, etc. So I grew up around real estate. I always found buildings super interesting. It just like when you think about when you think about space, it's just a square, right? It's four walls. But it's interesting because these four walls is essentially what we thrive on. It's where we live, where we work, where we play. I always found that concept somewhat unique. Someone can build an app, but someone else builds a building, and that's the backdrop to someone's life. So I found real estate always kind of interesting. It's always what I wanted to do. I've never deviated from that. I think, interestingly, real estate being the biggest asset class in the world, generally construction being the biggest driver of GDP in any country, it started to fuse a little bit with technology, which, I studied engineering. So those worlds started to collide pretty quickly. So I've always toggled between real estate and technology. And then now, luckily, these worlds get to fuse quite well.
You bring up something really interesting. I've thought a lot about this, and I've actually written several essays on this whole idea of, again, I call real estate the infrastructure of our lives. So
Yeah.
it's just this interesting thing. And it's like, when I see people just treating it so much like a tradable asset, I think it's a really dangerous way to view real estate. And because I think it's the fabric of what makes up our communities. Like exactly what you said. It's like, it's where you eat, it's where you create
Work,
relationships,
play.
it's work, play, everything. So no, I appreciate that view. Cool. All right. And where did you, and you grew up in New York, you said?
No, in Philly. So
In
I
Philly.
grew up
Okay.
in the suburbs of Philadelphia, went to university at Drexel, got close to a full ride to study engineering and business. I always like to joke like I'm the world's worst engineer. That's why I have Oleg. I never was a practicing engineer. I studied engineering, but out of school, I worked in private equity. So went straight into the business world.
Cool. So kind of give me the lead up to what led to Cuby and how you and Oleg met, and yeah, just give me
Yeah.
like kind of the foundational story.
Yeah, so like I said, I started my career in real estate private equity and development, and this was around the time when WeWork was getting going, which, I'm sure a lot of your audience is familiar with the infamous, notorious WeWork. I joined WeWork fairly early on. I think I left, I was in like the early hundreds in terms of employee count. I left when there was 13,000 people. So it grew into this massive thing fairly quickly. And I never really worked on like the conveyor belt WeWork. I worked on it was called special projects. So like a bunch of interesting things like launching We Live. I worked partially on some deals in the real estate fund because WeWork at some point launched the real estate fund. But it was a really interesting experience despite the negativity because WeWork, I'd say, was the catalyst behind prop tech in some capacity and what got venture incredibly excited about building operating businesses on top of real estate. You can argue was the wrong cost of capital totally. Like that's why I left. It just I went to go build an asset light business after. But anyways, the WeWork experience is unique because at the time WeWork was it was the most interesting elephant in the room. Everyone wanted to talk to WeWork, and I got to build an ecosystem of A, progressive developers, B, venture capital groups that were interested in backing real world applications, operating businesses that sat on top of real estate. So that was a very unique experience. I liked it, learned a lot. And after WeWork, I went to go build a business called Lifehouse, which was an asset light take on an operating business that sits on top of real estate. It was essentially a hotel business building technology to operate hotels a lot more efficiently, more specifically boutique hotels. But there was a separate PropCo component, meaning separate correct cost of capital that sat alongside the operating business and partnered with folks, which is
So you were
similar to how
about
we're thinking about Cuby.
just clear. So you were actually also purchasing you were purchasing hotels.
Third parties were, and
Third.
we
Okay.
were working with them, and
Okay.
sometimes we would put key money in, et cetera. So it was a business that raised about 100 million that I was involved in, and no, well, still around. TBD what happens to its future. But after that, I left to start a real estate development company of two of my mentors. It was doing fairly well and still is, and exceptional set of entrepreneurs. It was a real estate development company building housing across the US. We had a lot of pipeline, a lot of demand. And one thing I kept seeing over and over again on construction sites is there's a lot of gray beards and a lot of gray hair. And despite having access to capital, despite having good deals at our fingertips, there was issues hiring subcontractors, general contractors. This was in New York where, that's a highly constrained variable. So I like to think of myself as a rather risky developer. I'm willing to take risk on new innovation or ability to be a better developer, more creative. Like you said, there's probably a lot of folks that are a bit conservative when they can squeeze more juice just being more creative. And I started looking at different ways that industrialized construction concepts could be an application to reduce skilled labor.
Mm-hmm.
Think volumetric modular, prefabricated components, think 3D printing. I started trying to be a customer of that cohort of companies. This was about 4.5 years ago. And none of them made sense to me as a customer, either too expensive, there was regulation issues, not enough customization, etc. The list goes on. And coincidentally, through a family friend who, by the way, is also from Michigan, you might know him, but we can talk about that offline. He basically said, "Hey, I know what you're doing and what you're looking for. Meet this guy. This guy is based out of a weird Eastern European country. He has a unique take on this space." And that's how I met Oleg, who you recently interviewed. And Oleg pitches me this what I thought at first was the dumbest thing I've ever heard, which is I'm going to bring the factory to the construction site because it doesn't make sense to ship thousands of miles worth of millions of square feet, millions of tons of product. And he pitches me this concept of, hey, I'm going to make parts and prep parts that go into it started out as a multifamily concept of homes. I'm going to make those components and I'm going to do it in a factory that sits proximate to where the construction site is happening. And he shows me this inflatable building, and I'm like, okay, this guy's a wacko. He clearly doesn't understand how construction works. And then I continued kind of interviewing groups that I thought could make sense. And then the more I realized how impractical the logistics problem is, call it the transportation cost, the lead times by having a gigafactory that sits somewhere else, the more I kept coming back to like, wait, Oleg is onto something. This makes a lot of sense. So we basically spent a lot of time together, decided that we have incredibly complementary skill sets. Oleg being a one of N engineer, which I'm sure you've realized that pretty quickly after spending time with him. A very unique character.
Yeah,
Me having a
I heard the term. He's an engineer's engineer.
Yes, one of our investors likes to call him that, which I think is a great compliment because that said investor is one of the most technical people on earth. He started a unique R&D lab out of a very big Fortune 15 company. But yeah, so we have very complementary skill sets. I'd like to think my skill set is people and figuring shit out. That's maybe the best way to put it. Oleg's unique skill set is he spent 20 years building deep tech businesses, which only have recently become cool and backable. But he spent, his entire career in hardware and more importantly, catalyzing hardware to mass production, i.e. lean manufacturing. So we came together, decided to partner, and now it's been 4 really hard, stressful years, but we think we're headed in the right direction to help solve around an issue that is global at this point and has become a topic of mass conversation post US presidential election, post the Palisades fires in California, and that's housing. We very much are passionate about solving a unique problem, and that's how do we build more homes with fewer hands.
Cool. All right. So just the high level concepts, and we'll dig into different pieces. Is you're actually building factories, smaller scale factories adjacent to where construction sites are going to be. Can you have to dig into that a little bit more?
We embody what I think is corny, but what Elon Musk has kind of said many times over. And it's like what makes Tesla unique, or at least before they started humanoids and the whole AI movement, what makes Tesla unique isn't the Model Y or the cars they produce. It's the factory that they're able to make incredibly efficient, and therefore their margins are able to kill all else margins. And he's notorious for saying it's the machine that builds the machine that drives the moat. We think of our world similarly. Our product is a factory. It is by no means a home. Our product is a factory, and our day zero mentality is how do we build everything to ensure that that factory can scale, not physically as an individual unit level factory, but how do we mass produce factories? So our product is a mobile microfactory. It's a fully containerized factory. It very much fits the thematic of this podcast, which is decentralized manufacturing. And it's quite important because it's like, it's not necessarily like, oh, this is cool. We think this is the only way to do housing from a lean manufacturing perspective. And it's how do you decentralize the manufacturing process? How do you have a network of distributed factories as opposed to like high capex, massive gigafactories? And then there's like obviously subcategories of our thesis beyond that. But advancements in connectivity and logistics, manufacturing all at some point will become decentralized, we think. Microfactories closer to where demand actually lives. It'll reduce transportation, lead times, etc. There's a lot of reasons why we chose this approach. We can dive into it, but like our product is a factory. It's a mobile microfactory. It's containerized. That mobile microfactory uses very little skilled labor, both offsite in the factory and on-site to build homes without skilled labor, which then drives down cost of homes.
Got it. Okay. And you said you started 4 years ago, and like, can you just kind of go back a little bit in time and just kind of tell a little bit about, let me step back. So obviously this whole world of manufacturing, moving more back towards a production oriented economy is very much in vogue now post-Trump victory. I've always been an advocate of this. My work's always been around how to move more back towards a production oriented economy. But, you guys were toiling around for 3 or 4 years before this momentum right now, right? So kind of just give a little insight to the audience about, what some of your challenges or one of your biggest challenges been.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the innovation economy in general, first of all, I think venture should have gone back to what's happening now a lot sooner, which is like venture isn't for, oh, what's your CAC, what's your ARR? Like, let me look at this random software metric. Let me see if it's in line with someone else. Venture is about outsized returns. You're looking for dark corners where you have unlimited upside. That can only happen in making massive moonshot bets. You can argue what risk of binary, like risk you're willing to take from a technical perspective. Like you can have something that like, I don't know, not to bash anyone, but like mining asteroids is probably pretty binary from like a returns perspective, right? And then there's stuff like us, which like, it's technical, but it's feasible and feasible fairly quickly. But I think venture should have gone back to this a long time ago. And the reason kind of like what's interesting about the innovation economy and where we get dinged is when you make moonshot bets, the folks that win, like SpaceX, you have 50 other copycats, right? Because it works. But then the other end happens. When something doesn't work, you have this pause for the next like 20 years of venture not doing that category. Unfortunately, construction is one of those spaces where venture can't ignore it because the TAM is too big. Construction generally is always the biggest driver of GDP, so you can just in any country, so you can imagine how big of an, sector that is. Venture, despite not understanding this sector, there's always like cohorts that get backed, but like everyone has failed to date. There's obviously no answer yet, which is why we build so shittily and why we do it the same way we've done it for the last 100 years, right? Despite being able to go, to Mars soon, nothing's really evolved in the construction space. But, when you ask about challenges, the challenge is like we have a unique antithesis to the industrialized construction space, but because there's been so failures in the past and they're continuing to happen, right? Like Katera is the famous one, but Mighty Buildings, raised 180 million, I think, going out of business. You have Diamond Age going out of business, raised, close to 100 million. You have Vive, which raised, like, close to 400 million. And there's so many companies with a take on industrialized construction, all raising venture, which I'd argue maybe not the right cost of capital, all failing, which inadvertently dings us too. So that's been a challenge. I think generally, like, this is a very conservative space. The challenge is incumbent adoption. This is one of those spaces where, like, you can be me, a developer who's willing to take risk, but that developer answers to a more conservative lender, a more conservative LP. So there's like a lot of things we have to work around where like you can only innovate within a confine and there's like this box. As soon as you deviate from that box, you run into regulatory issues, you run into incumbent adoption issues, et cetera. I think cost of capital, like I said, is a problem. Folks are very excited to raise $100 million of venture, but like that's not the right cost of capital for very physical things at times. You have to be very good at weaning off of venture at the right time. Those things add up, but like generally deep tech is hard. Takes a lot of engineering hours, and we like to think of it as like who has the best cockroach mentality. And what I mean by that is like I personally would look at metrics like the ones we're trying to solve for internally if I was an investor. It's like how much technical de-risking can you get through to then commercialize? Because ultimately deep tech is this valley of death that most people get stuck on. They'll raise venture, they'll do a bunch of stuff, make noise, and then they never get to commercialization. They're like here. So how can you get through all the technical risk to then be comfortably able to commercialize? And unfortunately, this category happens to be very capital intensive and hard, and most folks can't get through the right amount of engineering hours to ultimately get to commercialization in a meaningful way.
Got it. So just the pure engineering hours it takes, then obviously just being a very capital and from the context of a capital raise standpoint, being a capital intensive business is kind of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, and it's the challenge is like how do you stay capital intensive while still getting through, a TRL of 0 to a TRL of 9.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's interesting. So maybe explain a little bit more, just so it's a little bit clearer for the audience. You started using terms like developer and offtake and all these things, but just you build these factories close to where the things are constructed. Just walk in a simple way that someone that's not from the real estate industry would understand, like how this all actually is going to work.
Yeah, the simplest thing I can explain about Cuby is, I guess for your audience, the simplest would be generally a home builder who builds a home, sells a home, rents a home, hires a general contractor. That's someone that physically builds the house. That general contractor then is responsible for hiring subcontractors. There's about 22 different parties involved when building a home in terms of subcontractors. Cuby is essentially a general contractor while also verticalizing all the subcontractors, and as if that general contractor had a manufacturing facility next door. So we're like a holistic end-to-end approach to building a home that a developer hires us to go actually build. Many times our factories, I think simply put, are like McDonald's, where we're generally partnering with a local incumbent to launch a factory. So they end up backing our factory. Our moat is our ability to launch a factory in a very capital light way, in an unprecedented capital light way. And then generally the folks we partner with happen to be the groups that are actually smoking their own supply, meaning they're buying into a factory, but they're also using that factory for their development company to actually hire and build the homes.
Got it. So then developers and other home builders are basically
Our customers.
Are your
are
customers.
The factory's customers.
Are the factory's customers. Okay, got it. Seems complicated.
I wish it was simpler. Sometimes I always tell myself it'd be nice to have like, I don't know, a direct to consumer t-shirt company. That would be awesome. A lot easier to explain, but
another snack business.
I think the businesses, and we're starting to see this, like you said, it's, in fashion again to do hardware and deep tech. And what we're starting to see is the real moats, if you look at the S&P over the last like 50 years, are really with vertically integrated companies. And I think, to give a shout out to Packy McCormick, because I think you read a lot of his stuff, he wrote that whole 4-part series on vertical integrators, and that's probably the best way I've seen it like written to date on like what that really means.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm the thing that and my main motivation for really putting everything together with going direct was I'm seeing all these technologies coming together that is just like this setup for this. Like it's going to be really hard, but it's a setup for this decentralized industrial revolution. I really truly believe it, and especially with the recent like announcements in robotics and AI, and you can just kind of see the writing on the wall. It's pretty fascinating. It's like for me, I'm like a lot of you have to be there's a lot of negative aspects of this if it goes too fast, but then it's like, but if we use this in a positive manner, I mean, think about, and Cuby's just one example, but like think about unleashing this truly more decentralized production revolution. I mean, I just think that's the root of so many of our issues, to be honest, and most people don't talk about it.
I mean, these are like the type of problems that are worth solving, right?
I
Like,
totally agree.
COVID highlighted supply chain shocks. Boom. Like that's why that needs to be solved.
Sure. But it's this thing, like, how do you think, but compete, this is an interesting part, but competing against economies is really hard, right? So how do you guys think about that? These big, massive home builders, tons of efficiencies, tons of economies of scale. They have probably monopsonies over a lot of their suppliers. So how do you think about that as far as competition goes and being able to compete with incumbent?
It's interesting. A lot of groups in our category, they're very excited to work with like a top 10 home builder in the US. And the cycle goes like this. They get a top 10 home builder excited, which for a top 10 home builder, it's a free call option, right? Then they use that top 10 home builder's interest to go raise a ton of venture dollars. But then that top 10 home builder needs them to execute. They don't execute because it's impossible to compete with top 10 home builders. Their band-aid is their economies of scale and their ability to subsidize their construction costs via, their other business line items. They build really efficiently. Like anyone that tells you, like top 10 home builders suck, they're bloated, they're very bad at building, they're wrong. Like they build incredibly cheap.
Sure.
The product also sucks as well, but that's a different story. But they build incredibly cheap. But they grow through consolidation, just like airlines, and they control about 50%, 60% of the market. We're not going after the top 10 home builders. We think the more unique opportunity is Bob Smith, the home builder, somewhere in Michigan, who's building 100 homes a year, who needs help competing with the top 10 home builders. And they're building at probably a 40 to 50% premium as to where like those top 10, top 20 home builders are building. So we're going after those folks.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting. And I mentioned this to Oleg when we had a conversation. You mentioned the quality thing. So I'm going to say it again because it's you'll appreciate it. And I think it's important for the folks to hear multiple times. So my mother recently moved back to Michigan. And over the years, she's moved a few times. So I've helped her with like the buying and the selling and construction of homes. And so I kind of have an exposure to that. And I've had spent a decade in real estate. So I understand that world. Anyways, so the last, I don't even know the name of the home builder, but she is in part of this like active senior community in Metro Detroit, all brand new. And I walked into the house and I don't even know how much, I mean, the house was probably, I don't know, somewhere around like $500,000 is what the house cost. Right. And I walked in and I'm like, seriously? Like the quality?
Yeah, it's wild.
I was like, I mean, this is on a different level though. I was like, this is like the walls are like paper thin.
To be fair, you're a little biased because you now split time in Europe.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'll put it to you this way. No one in Europe would ever live in a Lennar house, ever.
Sure.
There's a running joke in Europe amongst our engineers. If you put a gym on the second floor of a single family US home and you drop a weight, it'll go right through.
No, but my baseline is U.S. construction. So what I'm saying is, even on the standard of U.S. construction house, I'm telling you, I was blown away with the poor quality.
So that's happening for a reason, right? Like this ties to the housing problem and lack of affordability. Costs keep going up. We think it's a labor problem, but there's also a bureaucratic problem for sure. I'll send you the survey. It comes out every 2 years. It's the National Association of Home Builders. They release like a breakout of what on average goes into a single family home in terms of cost by line item. And then they give you like, here's the average final cost of a home to be built in the US. So construction cost today on average, this is averaged, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
explain why I think it's biased. It's around $162 a foot, which is quite high if you average that across the US. That $162 a foot, given it's high, developers, to keep their margin, which is typically like 10, 11%, their profit margin, they
Mm-hmm.
have to cut corners. That's why you're seeing quality fall through. You're seeing a lack of skilled labor. That also equates to quality malfunctions. But like, I don't even believe the 162. There's few developers I meet that can confidently tell me they're building for 162. I think that survey takes into account those top 20 home builders, which have bias. Their bias is 50,000 units of scale a year. Right. So yeah, I mean, the product is horrible.
So, I mean, this is such a the housing is such a complicated, nuanced issue, right? So in your mind, how do you, obviously Cuby is how you solve it, but I mean, just I guess more philosophically, when you look at the problem, what do you think the right approach is? Or maybe you break down what your approach is at Cuby, like at I don't know, at like a level that people could understand in a non-technical way.
So I saw someone write this about a different industry on Twitter, but I think it's very applicable to construction.
Okay.
Sometimes there's problems that like there's one big problem, but then there's like a million sub problems. No one starts working on the big problem because it's too hard to solve the little sub problems, which is very much construction. There's just so many layers to the onion.
Mm-hmm.
What we do is, I'd say the following. We put up a mobile microfactory, which is our way to say, okay, lean manufacturing can work in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
And we're either making, well, it's and or, it's actually and, we're making some components that go into a single family house. So things like a piece of the foundation, non-structural wall elements, the framing elements, like we're literally making from scratch, things like windows, like that is a product that we're making from raw inputs.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else we're just touching in some capacity. So in quotes, dirty work doesn't need to happen on site. So like we're pre-cutting things, we're prepping things. So then when we essentially break up a home into stages, a kit of parts, we palletize those parts and we deliver them last mile to the construction site where we can still use unskilled labor as an extension of the factory to put those kit of parts together into a home. But we touch all components of a home from foundation to finishes
Mm-hmm.
during assembly.
So it's this, if I were to kind of describe it to the audience, it's kind of like, it's just like if you just start with a blank piece of paper, pretty much, like, and say, okay, well, if we were to go back to first principles and like build this thing from the ground up, what would be the most efficient way to design and construct a house? If that's, is that accurate?
Yes. However, I think if you just have it's hard to have a blank page in this industry because
Mm-hmm.
then you go outside of those constraints. Remember, I told you there's like variable constraints, and I'll give them to you. Like, for example, on paper, in theory, it makes sense to go build $100 million gigafactory that's going to just churn out volumetric boxes, right? Like entire finished rooms. But then it's like, okay, logistics doesn't make sense. Then you're talking about a third party putting it together. They don't know how to put it together. You're talking about rigid constraints around customization, which means you're no longer compliant for 26,000 different zoning codes. People forget that construction in the US, I mean, Europe too, but in the US alone, there's 26,000 different zoning codes. There's
That's
a
crazy.
regulatory, like it's hard, like it's a highly regulated space to build something in the first place. So you can start with a blank envelope, but then you run into issues. So it's like you first have to define what's allowed, and then you play within this like box. I would think of us this way, like if you want to get really zoomed out, we
Mm-hmm.
want to be the infrastructure for building buildings. Like we want to be, as corny as it is, like
Yeah.
AWS for building.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to get it in like a clear picture for folks just listening. So where is it at now? So have you built the first factory? Is it operational? Like where are you guys at today?
Yeah, we have about 400,000 engineering hours plus under our sleeve, which is a lot. We were able to do that by leveraging Eastern European operations, meaning less capital intensive, highly technical STEM backgrounds for folks. We've been around for 4 years, about 150 people on the team. Luckily, we don't look on paper like 150 people on the team because of this capital efficiency. We have our first of a kind, so our scaled down version of a mobile microfactory in operation, starting to ramp up and build homes, which is exciting. And then we're signing contracts for factories across the US and other parts of the world. We have to learn how to walk really, really well before we can run. So we're focused on 1 to 2 commercial grade factories, which we already have in tow. Then we're going to expand our Papa factory or factory of factories, because like our product as a factory, we need operations to actually like make the factories in great sums and quantities on a time scale that's pretty extravagant. That's later. And then we can eventually ramp up to doing 20 factories a year. But we have to go really slow. We have to be patient. We have to make sure it works. There's really one proof point in this industry. Can you build cheaper than the way home builders build today? All else doesn't matter. You can build the prettiest home. You can build the most durable foam. You can use the most innovative materials out there. Industry doesn't give a shit. It cares about how cheap can you build a home. If you build cheap enough, they will come because they can't afford not to.
So where is the first of a kind? Is that the first of a kind facility or factory that's up? Is that in Eastern Europe?
That's in Eastern Europe,
Okay,
yes, where
where
we
the
have our
engineering team.
R&D as well.
Okay,
It's basically our typical MMF, mobile microfactory, is 30,000 square feet. This
hmm
one is it's 20,000 square feet split in half. So it's two of our inflatable structures next door to each other. That way we can move machines around, test things, etc. But I would say like we're 90% there on everything. Tested, works, like the thing to remember, like this all had to happen sequentially. First, we had to design the kit of parts. Has to do a lot with supply chain, by the way. Two, we had to design machines that make the kit of parts. And then you have to figure out how to shove them into containers, which is pretty challenging. And then three, I'd say most of our IP is around process mapping. Like, like most of this is coordination more than anything else. It's process and it's software that helps you coordinate and orchestrate that process. I'd say if I were to pick our IP over the next 10 years, it's like our ability to process map how a home gets built.
yeah, yes. It's really a logistics and engineering problem, really at the core.
I would say okay, GC, like being a general contractor is an interesting business. Some of these groups will literally do 15 billion in revenue, and there's a lot of them, right? But their margin's like 2%.
Totally.
That's insane. Like that is insane to think about. That means they're losing, 98% of everything they're bringing in. So those GCs, if they were the best logistics procurement companies in the world and the best process information companies in the world, their margin would be 30%, 40%. So we're just trying to be the best logistics process information company in the world with an application in construction.
Sure. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about this. You are, I would say, QB and what you're working on is like right square smack in the middle of the whole MAGA movement, right? Like it represents like everything, right? It's like how do you build high quality housing cheaper through innovation? It's bringing manufacturing back, it's localized manufacturing, it's the whole nine. So I'm sure you're part of this cohort of builders who are kind of this next phase of folks doing this across industries. How do you find that community right now? Like, is it very robust, or do you hear is kind of the media barking much louder than what it actually exists? What's your kind of take on it?
Our lead investor, this round that we're finalizing, they hosted or co-hosted an event at Mar-a-Lago recently, which I got to go to. And the energy is just, it's amazing. The energy is amazing. Like, I don't think it's just Twitter hype or whatnot. Like, I think folks are excited about these big problems, these big categories. I think politically, financially, there's backing behind such a movement. And you're seeing a lot of founders who are less excited about building another software company. They're more excited about the physical world. I don't get why more people weren't excited about this in the last decade. Like, to me,
Sure.
it's just so much more interesting to build physical things. By the way, remember the whole metaverse thing? Billions of dollars flowed into that and then just disappeared overnight. Like, what a waste. We could have actually built real world things, you know? So, but yeah, but I'm generally excited about it. We're seeing movement. You're 100% right. Like, we have a great tailwind behind us. Housing remains a problem. Even if we're not ready this year to go do 100 factories, it's only going to get worse. The housing problem is just going to continue to get worse. More workforce is retiring out of this space. Most of the existing housing stock is getting old. It needs to be replaced. Like interest rates are high, making it hard for developers to build and for households to move to different houses. Therefore, they're stuck in their existing houses, et cetera. So I think we're positioned well. And I think at some point there's going to be quite a lot on the public private sector side. And we're trying to take advantage of the fact that like our factory is local. It creates local jobs. It creates local taxes. We're trying to partner with public sector and say like, hey, if we come to this township, like we're adding quite a lot of value.
Is someone who's a builder in this space and is part of this cohort of kind of next gen manufacturing businesses, what in your mind needs to be built to make, like, what else could exist infrastructure wise to make your lives easier to enable more Cubys to exist in the world? Abstract way in construction, but just in general around deep tech making in hardware.
I mean, I think it's already happening and it's a positive tailwind around the funding story. So there's more access to capital for such companies across manufacturing, across supply chain, across robotics, et cetera, just generally like a movement. And by the way, I think there's less fear around CapEx heavy businesses. I think what needs to exist, which is, you play in this world quite a bit, but it's different cost of capital from venture. Venture should only be used for R&D. I don't know how much I can scream that to everyone. Like you would think WeWork was a great lesson on like, but people are repeating the same things. We're seeing, folks go and raise $100 million venture rounds. They're using those proceeds for factories, for equipment, for CapEx, things that are depreciating, things that will never have a return that's equatable to a venture level return. So I think what needs to coexist along the venture ecosystem are dollars that are both debt and structured equity, that are asset level backed without any warrants to the opco, et cetera. So like true folks that are willing to take credit risk or, structured equity risk to go back a factory, to go back, a first of a kind, et cetera.
And do you think that, does that come from the private, like, do you see traditional private equity folks coming into creating structures for that? Or do you believe it needs to be something like new stuff needs to be created, new models need to be created?
Yeah, for sure. And we're seeing some folks think about that. I think, we saw this in prop tech, right? Like, it's funny. People started talking about propco, opco, but like that has existed forever in hotels. If you've ever stayed at
Sure.
like Citizen M, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
Management
exactly, someone said, hey, I'm raising $100 million, 90 million of it is going to be used toward acquiring 3 sites. 10 million is I need some R&D for beds that move up and down. But it's this one cohesive like company, right? Like that's private equity for you. But then post WeWork, people are like, oh, maybe we don't use venture dollars. Like maybe venture dollars are for X, opco, the parent co, and then we have separate propco dollars, et cetera. I think that will happen. We're trying to structure our business that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important, but I think there needs to be more funds, more capital doing that. And we're seeing it start to form. It's complicated because it's like someone might want to invest in your opco, but then they also might give you debt for a factory. But then it's like, who takes precedence if things goes wrong? Like these are separate entities.
Sure.
There need to be like a wall of China,
You bring up such an interesting point, which is why I always, and in my angel investing activity, and I work especially with younger entrepreneurs, I really try to help them understand like how important it is to understand capital strategy. They don't like, even in my own experience, like when you bring capital in or investors in, it can just have such a dramatic impact on what you can and cannot do. And it really can affect, and a lot of times compromise sometimes the objectives of a mission of why you're even doing what you're doing. So it's good for you to say that, because I think the more folks that hear that, the better. Because from what I see, I think there's all different types of capital that's needed. And the thing that drives me a little bit crazy, to be honest, man, it's like, there is so much money that's shifted towards climate tech and impact oriented investing, whatever that means. But there's so much capital on the sidelines. Like it's incredible. It's the opportunities that there's not enough opportunities. But the problem that I find is so many folks that are managing these funds, they actually don't even know kind of what they're managing or what they're looking for. Anyway, so it's a really interesting.
It's interesting that you say that. We know a group that I think is incredibly smart in understanding the opportunity of like backing, project finance.
Sure.
What I gave them as feedback, and I think it's correct. It's like you can raise a $500 million fund, go like anchor it with Apollo or whatever. But the problem is we're still in the early inception of all these companies. There might not be enough companies to actually deploy it into that scale, because your CAC on deploying that capital is like one company that can scale to like 100 facilities or whatever. Like we would be a good example if we get it right. Sure. But there's not enough of those yet. And that's why like a lot of times propco, opco funds, like, yes, you could raise that, but like, do you have enough good companies to back on a repeated basis? And I think we're not there yet. That's the other challenge.
It's funny you hit that. I mean, this is like really one of my big motivations, because I agree completely. My motivation with going direct, it's like, there's the shortage of. There's no shortage of capital. Like the last thing we need are more capital allocators. It's like, we don't need more capital allocators. Honestly, we don't. It's like, you need people trying to build stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm just really happy, man. It's interesting when I was being from Detroit, I'm from Detroit originally, and working in real estate there for over a decade, my whole ethos, everything I was about was how do we make Detroit a place where, how do we bring back a more production oriented economy? Because I thought that's how we could differentiate ourselves in Detroit. And unfortunately, this was back in like 2011, or between 2008 and 9. And then, for the next 10, 15 years there, it was really a bummer because like most of the resources and everything was like digital, right?
Yeah.
Like next Silicon Valley. And I was sitting there being like, maybe because I was in Silicon Valley before, and I was like, guys, like that's not who
We're
we
so
are.
well positioned to be like the infrastructure, like city.
Oh my goodness. And I was
that.
like, and it was just such a, I mean, it's, hopefully they'll catch a tailwind now, but what happened in that market, man, which you'll appreciate from a real estate standpoint, is real estate and everything was so cheap. And
Yeah,
like,
I mean, listen, Dan Gilbert was onto something. If only he was like, all right, let me like pick up on this reindustrialized thing.
oh man, don't
That
even
could have
get
been
me.
like Bedrock 2.0, you know?
Don't even give me. Oh man.
By the way,
I won't get into all that, but yes, agree completely.
you should have Aaron or Austin from Atomic on this podcast because like, they're focused on the reindustrialized conference that they hosted for the first time, and that's going to be repeated again in Detroit. I think like that highlighted how the Midwest that's an incredible place to build a deep tech business. You have a lot of this legacy, call it hardware talent
Totally.
from all the factories and just generally like generational legacy. People forget like El Segundo is great. That's awesome. If you're a startup, you're hiring 5 hardware engineers, that's easy. Go hire 100. Good luck. Literally good luck, especially with 20 other companies competing for the same thing. Like, no way.
Yeah, and then what's around the corner in the robotic? I mean, even just seeing the handful of robotics companies or companies building in, like especially in the humanoid space. I mean, they can't hire fast enough.
Yeah, the humanoid thing is interesting actually. Cuby's probably the best positioned construction technology company for that, I would
Yes.
say.
Okay.
Because our
Let's
factories.
dig into that. Let's dig into this.
Wait, can you give me 2 seconds? I'm going to
Yeah,
go
of
charge
course.
it. Just 2
Yeah, of course.
seconds. My computer's on 3%. So I think if Oleg and I were actually good fundraisers, which I think we're too anchored in the real world. So like we tell people how much we de-risked versus how much upside is left, which is like the opposite of what you're supposed to do in venture. But if we were very good at venture, we'd probably lead with this because our factory is repeatable every time, right? It's the same box. It is literally the same thing that you copy and paste versus like imagine you're launching a factory, you break a site. It's different every time. You got to lay it out. Like it's literally a different one-off every time because our factory itself is repeatable. It's the same process every time, which means that all the process and software written on top is reading that same factory and those same processes, etc. So like the process mapping that we're doing from like taking in a raw input to finishing a house, that is the data set that you would use to train a humanoid to be a general application for construction. Like you can't just take like let's assume like I don't know, maybe my bet's on Optimus, but there's probably going to be like 100 Chinese companies as well.
Sure.
But let's just say like Optimus gets to a point where ROI makes sense and it's cheaper than like using an unskilled laborer, which right now, it's not. But let's just say it gets to an ROI positive point. Let's assume that a humanoid gets to a point where it can do general applications, which is like, I don't necessarily believe we're 10, even 20 years close to that, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning like, not just like picking up something
Of
at a
course.
factory and going like this, but
It's
like
with
think about what it takes to build a house
and yeah, like true
and multifunction,
Yeah.
etc. But like, let's assume it gets to that. We're past all that. Our reps that we're going to be doing on building houses, like that is the data set that you give that humanoid to train it. So that's why I say like our biggest moat over time is probably the process mapping around building homes.
Sure.
Like Oleg had to write out like 10,000 different line items of like what's happening both sequentially, non-sequentially. It's like a multivariate equation of process. Like you do something on site that triggers something that needs to be done in the factory, and it's like all interconnected between 100+ people.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Actually, this is an interesting one. So how many people, so sorry, how many homes a year approximately does a microfactory make at more or less at capacity, just roundabout?
Our math is around 430,000 buildable square feet.
Okay.
We hold about a 15% downtime coefficient.
Okay.
So, let's call it like 180 homes a year, something like that.
Okay. So 180 homes a year per factory. What is the size of the factory approximately square footage wise?
It's about 30,000 square feet.
Okay, cool. So that's like pretty small, like pretty compact.
For factory world, that's definitely
Yeah,
small for
super
sure.
small. Okay, so 30,000 square feet, 180 homes. And then how many people are you? This is kind of my roundabout way about the robotics thing, which we'll get into, but how many people do you expect, if your operating capacity, will be employed at the factory?
Yeah, so because we're an end-to-end solution, most of our labor is actually on the actual construction sites,
Okay.
assembling the kit of parts. In the factory itself, we have about 35 people on the factory floor in
Okay.
2 shifts. Then we have like another dozen to 2 dozen that are general and administrative, like call them other,
Okay.
non-production.
So 50 to 60 people ish.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And then we have, let's say we have 20 different construction sites within a 150-mile radius. There's four unskilled folks in 2 shifts. That's about 160 folks at scale in 2 shifts, across 2 shifts.
Say that one more time, the last part. One more
Four
time.
workers per site, 20
Okay.
sites times 2 shifts. That's 160.
Okay, so you're actually okay. So this is it. Okay, I didn't put two and two together. So
Yes, the
you
factory itself, that
right.
SPV, it employs the labor that's also assembling the home.
Okay, I didn't. So that was
This
my
has
next
to be end
question.
to end. That's one of our theses is like you can't
Yeah,
just be a seller of parts or a volumetric box and have some third party GC. That doesn't work. It has to be end to end because you want to extend the lean manufacturing process on site as well.
okay, so as a developer or home builder, what you're doing is you're designing the house, and then you have the land, and you're getting the land development ready. You're doing all the permitting. You're doing all that other stuff, and then really Cuby takes care of the rest. Excuse me. I
Yeah,
mean, as a GC, I mean, I guess it's the same. So this is the best way to describe it for the
yeah.
audience. Okay.
So I'll put it this way, kind of. And this is important. Tesla, the reason why they were able to automate so much so quickly is because, they had decades of Toyota's production system to work off of, which, by definition, Toyota's production system is like true lean manufacturing, where they said, okay, how do we use unskilled labor and how do we reduce labor hours, right? Only after that point, once you've squeezed all the human efficiency you could possibly squeeze, you can go on to automate. And that's when it's ROI positive. No one's done Toyota's production system yet in construction. So like, what can you automate at this point? You don't even know what you're automating in what direction. So any company in the space that's like, oh, fully robotics automation, like, yeah, that tells me right away you're doing one small piece of the construction process. Maybe it's rebar, maybe it's framing, but
Sure.
there's no way in hell you're automating building a home. So you still need the unskilled labor at this point to bring
Sure.
down cost.
Well, I mean, there's still, I mean, the reality is this when you're talking, but and you also just when you talk about all the nuances, anyways, that goes into actually putting the home up, not the construction part, but I'm talking about the entitlement process, the approvals, putting it up for sale, selling it. I mean, there's just a lot of elements that go into building and selling a home. I mean, that's just the reality that you're just not gonna get around, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I don't know, is any of it public of where you're looking or where you're going to be putting your first factories in the US?
Yeah, we have quite a lot of demand at the moment, but I think the first one we're going to send to Nevada, which is a really interesting market. We have great partners there. They're very capable, and they own land quite a lot, and they're looking to build 1,000+ homes over the next decade using our facility. So that's the focus as of now.
Great. And do you have a general sense of timing for when hopefully you'll
Yeah, we think like first half of 2026 we'll have a facility standing there.
got it. Cool. Just kind of going back to the why for you. Obviously real estate's been in your family, it's in your blood, you're attracted to it at a very deep level. But this whole idea, was it is it the localized production component that really gets you excited, or is it really just all of it together that just you're just kind of like, this is just what I meant to, this is why I'm going to sacrifice several years of my life in other ways to build and help solve this problem?
Like I just look, I think it's important. Like if you want to build a company, I think you have to be willing to pick industries that are big, where if you have to pivot 100 times, you'll still be able to succeed. This is one of those industries. I also think it's rewarding because, like we talked about it, a house is like the most intimate thing to someone's happiness, I think. It's where you start, you live there, you start a family there, your family lives there. Like we've reached a point in America where it's untenable at this point to own a home. It's not feasible for most people, I would say, like truly most people. Actually, I think like millennials, they don't have enough for a $250,000 home deposit in their bank account. So it's going to get worse. And I think it's like, to me, it's like a pretty fundamental thing. It's hard to call yourself a first world country where most people can't afford a house. That's like a weird oxymoron.
Well, there's an interesting. I would challenge it a little bit because there's an interesting debate. Because some people make the debate is like America's just going to turn into more of a renter
Yeah,
centric
but that's
society.
because they have to. You can argue that it's demographically because, oh, people want to be more transient, et cetera. Maybe like they can reinvest those dollars. Sure, if you're sophisticated, maybe. But like I don't think people are renters by default. I think they're renters by default, not by choice.
Yeah, I think there's just an element of owning your own home. Now I'm shocked at how many people go in and buy homes when they shouldn't buy homes. That's a separate
Yeah,
conversation.
that's probably different.
Okay. And where are you based? Where's Cuby's kind of US HQ right now?
We're mostly in New York, but like we're kind of wherever we need to be. And I mean, we're going to shift pretty big into the Northeast
Okay.
from like a corporate hiring perspective.
Okay.
But like we run the business in a very asset light way where we essentially have an entity in Eastern Europe that basically is the asset heavy entity with a lot of our engineers. We basically own it without owning it. Like we have a very unique way of structuring this business
Okay.
that allows us to be a little more nimble.
Got it. Okay. Have you seen based upon kind of what you're doing at QB? I mean, are there public funds and other grants and stuff available for that kind of addressing what you're looking that are applicable to QB?
Yes, there's a lot in the DoD, the Department of Energy, they're coming out with a lot of stuff. What I've kind of learned a lot about the public sector is things become available for you once you're discovered and that solution is like the solution and someone internally knows it. Like my discovery is a lot of these like grants, they exist because they've already decided who it's going
Sure.
to.
Totally. Yeah, that's government in general. What was I'm skipping around here though. I'm trying to remember what was the name. I think they're based in Austin. They raised a ton of money during like the ZERP era. It was 3D printed homes. Oh, what is the name of it?
Icon?
Yes. What's going on
Yeah.
with them?
My take generally is 3D printing is probably not the answer to mass producing homes.
Mm-hmm.
It goes to this like notion that, hey, framing is 10% of the home building process. Even if you get that 100% right, which no 3D printer has gotten right yet because unit economics don't make sense by the time you set it up, the capex of that printer, like it's just not cost effective at the moment. But assume you got it fully right, like it works. You've automated 10% of the home building process. Framing has not been the hard part. Actually, framing a house has gotten cheaper based on that report I referenced earlier. So
Mm-hmm.
I think like you have to touch all aspects of a home to truly impact the cost reduction. I don't think 3D printing is the answer. It's just like too far from what we're doing today to, I think, have mass adoption. I
Yeah.
can't speak to Icon. I think great vision. They branded super well. Have a lot of very impressive backers. They clearly have built 100 homes of Lennar. I argue who's eating the cost, Lennar or them, on what they're building. Yeah, I personally don't believe 3D printing is the answer, but like I'm happy when folks try things.
Yeah, no, for sure. It just moves the whole industry forward if you just try things. So, kind of last question. This is more specific, like industry specific, just for the audience to understand. So, everyone hears the term modular or
Yeah.
3D printing, modular homes. Like, do you have a way of describing kind of this folks that are like looking at the like next gen construction like this about alternative ways to build a home and just how would you describe it and then how Kubi fits into that? Because there's
Yes.
prefab, there's
Yeah.
modular, there's
Yeah. So the way I describe it is like generally the overarching is industrialized construction. That's what
okay.
folks are trying to do. They're literally trying to industrialize the construction ecosystem. I'd say modular is probably like the catch-all bucket. But when I think of modular, I think like volumetric boxes. So think someone makes an entire room off-site and ships this finished room to be stacked on top of one another. It works pretty well in highly repeatable asset classes like hotels, student
Mm-hmm.
housing, where you have that same room every time. Works well. Still issues like around demand, issues around shipping, issues
Sure,
around third parties putting
logistics.
it together, etc. Prefab is a form of modular where you're either making some portion of kit of parts or all the kit of parts, Like maybe you're just making walls that have MEP baked into them, etc. So like it's really think of it prefab as Lego blocks. That's probably the best analogy.
Okay.
And then there's 3D printing. It's exactly what you imagine. You bring a 3D printer and you try to print a concrete frame.
Mm-hmm.
We probably fill it. We're probably a combination of like traditional construction, deceptively and on purpose, with prefab.
With prefab. Okay, cool. No, super helpful. Cool, man. Well, hey, listen, I appreciate you taking the time. It was great to learn a little bit more about you and what's going on in Cuby. And like I said, it's just right at the core of the type of folks that we're going to have on the pod. So thanks for being one of the early guinea pigs, and tell the audience where they can reach you online, or I don't know if you're on Twitter or any social handles.
Yeah, I have a Twitter. I don't remember what my Twitter is though. So or X. But folks can just go to our website, cubytechnologies.com. We have a contact form. Goes to us. We read everything. By the way, you should do like what the 20 VC podcast always ends, or like who would you have next on the
Who's you? Oh, I'm gonna hit you up anyways. Don't worry. I'm gonna get several. I'm getting several names from you. So who would you? But we'll do it live. Who would you have next on the podcast?
You know who I think would be actually really interesting? It's someone we're working with a lot. It's a guy by the name of Oliver Beavers.
Okay.
And the reason why he's interesting because it touches on that topic you were very curious about, which is cost of capital. Oliver is building a pretty cool AI business, actually, that essentially replaces the underwriting aspect of project finance. But he's basically come from like backing infrastructure his whole career.
Ooh.
So
Okay.
he sees all these companies that are now coming to him like us saying like, look, we need infrastructure dollars. How do we put together the right data room? How do we put together the right models? How do we structure our contracts to be project finance backable? He'll have a huge take on like all the companies in the space right now, like the, you know, like manufacturing space or other deep tech space and how they're backed and should be backed. So I think it could be an interesting conversation.
Cool. I wrote it down. Cool, man. Well, I appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the other side, my man. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Jordan.